Bonjour tout le monde, bienvenue au Bracket Show. Bruno Barrette en direct de la troisième et dernière journée à Confoo. Je suis accompagné par un de mes collègues chez Don Techno, Francis Gauthier, et nous recevons
Bonjour.
avec nous Christian. Sorry, I don't want to mispronounce your last name. Uh,
Wenz, c'est très simple.
Vince. All
Wenz.
right. So,
Salut tous.
hi, welcome with us. Nice to meet you. Um, Before we start getting into the questions, maybe tell us a bit about yourself.
Yeah, so hi, I'm Christian Wenz. I live in Munich in southern Germany, and I started working as an architect and developer for web technologies. About 25 years ago. So I'm really old, I kind of discovered the topic of web application security about 20 years ago, and thought, okay, this would be a temporary phase. This would go away. The situation would get problemless, if that's a word. And here I am, still having lots of fun in web application security. So nice to meet you all.
Yeah,
Looking
thanks
forward
for
to the
being
interview.
here.
Pleasure.
So, Francis, maybe I can let you start with the first question.
Sure. Thanks, Bruno. Well, thank you, Christian, for being here. So the first question,
Welcome.
you just got out of your second talk at Confoo. So how did it go?
Oh, I think it went very well. I think there was a phone ringing in the distance in between, but no, apart from that, all went well. All the demos worked, and I think I had some good content. Thank you.
All right.
Yeah.
So, getting into the web security subject. In a project's development lifecycle, when do you think web security is addressed nowadays, most of what people do, and when do you think it should be addressed?
I think it's a bit like using testing and quality assurance. You all know this typical chart. So if it costs you 1 unit of fixing a defect in the design phase, then it's 10 units during development and 100,000.
Mm-hmm.
Same with security. Same with web application security. It should be there from early on. Doing just risk assessment. What could happen, what should happen. One very exciting technology that serves as a defense in depth mechanism is content security policy. But if you want this to be effective, it needs to come in also very early in the process, so very early in coding process. It comes in late. So quite often companies call me because they have been attacked. That's of course the worst case. But well, what you want to do there? There is no 100% security. But also often it is okay. We were audited, and now we have these 100 pages of auditing report. Okay, so how can we fix this, and how can we make sure that next time it's maybe just 10 pages, like the intro and the summary, and nothing in between? And that's when I come in, right? So usually, or not usually. Usually is maybe a bit too harsh, but often security is kind of like a patch that's put on the wound after it's there, but it's just better having no wound, right? So the earlier the better. I know it's difficult because if you just look at the financial aspects, security costs effort and money, and if all goes well, you put effort and money in, and then in the end you have an application that works exactly as before because you can't see security. But what you eventually see is the absence of security. So, but in a worst case scenario, you spend money for security, and then in the end you have to get rid of an important feature of your web application because you can't get it secure. On the other hand, had you known that during the design phase, then you still wouldn't have that feature, but you would have spent less money on developing that feature. So yeah, usually the earlier it's part of the process, the better, but it's the one thing you don't see. Maybe it's something like architecture. You don't really, as the end user, you don't see the architecture of an app, right? You just see, does it work, does it not work? You see the design, you see the actual functionality, but those are these invisible yet important things. You wouldn't do a large-scale app without having proper architecture, and you shouldn't have a large-scale app without proper security in place.
So clients don't see this as important as getting their features.
It depends. I mean, more and more clients understand it, and I don't say understand it because I always have 100% of the truth, but they share my vision of how it should be done. But yeah, often especially if you have a tight budget, then you try to find out. Okay, so I have a tight budget, my resources are limited. So what do I get rid of in the feature list? And then it's just a natural thing of getting rid of the invisible stuff first. It's like having unit tests, right? You don't see those unit tests, so let's get rid of that. I think if you have testing in place, then it takes you longer to get the application, right? But you win often in the end because of the lower maintenance costs. But yeah, the short-term vision makes security sometimes obsolete.
Okay.
Yeah. And sometimes clients often ask for, okay, the system has to be secured, but
anyway,
you don't have any measure. It's like it's not. There's no. It's qualitative. It's so when they ask for a security, the app to be secure. Well, how and how much effort we should put on it? How far we go on security? So it has to be scoped.
Exactly. Very good point. Very, very well put. Yeah. Exactly.
Well, I'll go on another question. So we talk about like starting new project, and how about existing project? Like we inherit from an existing project made by another colleague or an existing project on another client. Should the first step when diving into it is to make some security assessment, even actually working on the requested features?
I think the general answer depends a little bit on the scope of the project and what the plans are. I mean, I once was in a project for a short-lived TV show, and of course they said, we do this project and it runs while the TV show runs, and then we just throw it away. Really throw it away. We don't need this any longer. So it really depends a little bit. It also depends on whether the old application is kind of in a stale state where we just try to keep it alive, or whether we are refactoring it or even considering doing a rewrite. But I'm always very wary of rewrites because you lose all of the learnings from the previous editions, right? But in general, I mean, for larger projects, we audit those projects, or we get them audited. We usually don't do this ourselves when a project has a certain scale, because we are just blind to our own mistakes. That's, I guess, just natural, right? But yeah, of course, we try to audit that as often, and we try to apply as many levels of security to an application. So one thing, for instance, is, and I briefly mentioned this in my two talks, is that there are now several security features built into browsers. Most of them come in form of HTTP headers. Content security policy is probably the most prominent one, but there are many, many others. And just slapping them on an existing application in many cases can just, give us a lot of bang for the buck, because we get additional security with rather little effort. Now, I did mention content security policy specifically, and maybe should add that with content security policy, it's not always like you slap this on, but instead for a legacy app, which is maybe using non-best practices approaches, like a lot of inline styles and inline JavaScript and loading JavaScript from dozens of servers, there it's kind of hard to get a good content security policy that's tight enough to be secure, but also to avoid a lot of rewrites for the existing application. So having a content security policy first is much, much better. So for brownfield projects, that might be a challenge. But still, if it succeeds, additional layer of protection, other HTTP headers, additional layer of protection, and sometimes again with rather little effort and large gain.
Are there any tools that can quickly do an assessment or test our application to see common pitfalls that we wouldn't have thought, and the issue is there?
Yeah, so I think there are two main approaches. One approach is specific auditing tools that fire specifically crafted requests on your website. So looking for specific attacks, whether there might be cross-site scripting or SQL injection, just to name two very common ones. Depending on the technology stack, maybe they are rather rare, but just looking for those things that you can kind of automatically test when you crawl an application, so you have a generic approach. The problem with those tools is that you then have to find the needle or needles in the haystack, because you sometimes get a lot of potential vulnerabilities, but maybe they are not vulnerabilities because the software has no idea about your application and cannot always assess whether this is actually expected behavior or not. So this is the one thing. So this is rather complex, and it's not management summary compliant because if you run this auditing tools and you get 100 warnings, and then this looks horrible, but maybe if of those 100 warnings, 99 are just irrelevant, then maybe it's not that bad. And the other approaches, and there are actually services for that, but it depends on whether you want to use them or want to use something homegrown, is an application that just issues an HTTP request to your website and then looks at the HTTP headers coming back, checking for those security features. This is nice if you use all of those security features, then it's really nice for management summary. But on the other hand, just using those headers itself doesn't guarantee you security, especially with things that you have to configure, like a permissions policy or content security policy. You can write policies that allow everything. So for one of those tools that just check, is the header there, yes or no? This doesn't really give you security or doesn't really prove security, but it sure looks nice. But just having a look at whether you're using those main features, I think, is a good process. And especially if you create the web application on your own or in your team, I mean, it's not something you have to test every week, right? It's a nice automated test, but I mean, what kind of headers you're sending, and there are websites that try to do that, and that. It's always nice to see, but if there's a new header coming up, there's always a discussion. Should you support the header before web browsers support that header? And there are different views on that, right? So maybe that result you get from an automated test is not as conclusive as if you just say, okay, team, these are the headers we need to support, and that's what we do. And yeah. The positive side effect of that is if someone is auditing your web application, of course they do manual audits and have hopefully a very, very close look at the application. But what they also do is they all have, including myself, they have kind of placeholder text, right, and templates for this header is missing, this header is missing, this header is missing. Okay. So if the header is not missing, the report just gets smaller automatically. It's not decisive, but it's a positive side, right? Let me put it that way.
You mentioned the SQL injection attack previously. Do you think it's still a concern these days? Because I know there's a lot of old systems, but the good thing is that frameworks and new language avoids these vulnerabilities as much as possible, bringing tools that help us to avoid these attacks. So what are your thoughts on this?
I completely agree with you. I would say that's my reply to that. So indeed, the current OWASP top 10, the list of top 10 security risks for web applications, still puts injections on number 1 in the top spot. And with injections, they mean they mean SQL injection and a few others. Yeah, and I mean, I've argued this a couple of times, and I mean, if I look at the stack, right, with some stacks, I know that I won't find SQL injection, or it's super unlikely that I do. And indeed, SQL injection is really rare these days because you have some kind of OR mapper, Hibernate or Entity Framework, really depending on the stack. So it's close to impossible to craft SQL injection there as a developer, let alone as an attacker. And even if you do write SQL because you need better performance than those OR mappers, still everyone knows about parameterized queries, right? Of course, there is the issue of legacy applications where you tend to find more SQL injection. But yeah, I don't think it deserves the #1 spot now. And I mean, I've misjudged the list in the past, but I'm so confident that the #1 spot of the 2021 OWASP Top 10 will not be injection.
Okay.
I mean, they put cross-site scripting, which has the highest absolute numbers of incidents, on the, I think, #7 spot, right? And it was in the top 3 for years because they said, content security policy, blah blah blah. But yeah, injections needs to go on further down the list. It's yeah, definitely. If it happens, it's a catastrophe.
Right.
But it shouldn't happen for the web applications of our age. No. So I completely agree with Francis.
Okay. Well, another aspect of vulnerabilities, we were going forwards on putting code on browsers like WebAssembly. So can things like WebAssembly, thinking about Blazor here, help improve security?
Yep.
Since we're now moving compile assemblies into our browsers now?
I like. Let me start with I like WebAssembly a lot because it just opens up a few new opportunities, right? And also opens up the creation of web application for people who are less exposed to web development before. It of course also comes with some disadvantages because I mean sometimes just trying to bring other languages into the browser where JavaScript was the only language allowed. It went kind of terribly wrong before, right? I wouldn't say terribly wrong, but I mean, did you know that I wrote a Silverlight book once? Did I tell you that?
Silverlight?
Is this part? No, it's yeah, Silverlight. Yeah, it was horrible. It was I was in Shanghai and went into a bookshop on vacation, and then I saw a Chinese translation of that book.
Oh, really?
And I think the US publisher that they didn't even publish the book because they just saw that the technology was going down. But some Chinese publisher saw this. So no. Back then, of course, that was plugin based, right? Yeah. And nowadays with WebAssembly, it's just baked into browsers. But back to your question, still, I mean, it's tightly sandboxed in what you're allowed to do. It's using the same security mechanisms that are in place for the JavaScript code you're running. So technically, it kind of goes through the same pipeline. So I would not expect any new attacks there because of the same sandbox that exists. But on the other hand, a couple of years ago, someone developed an attack that was just abusing links. So if you open up a third-party website with a link in a new tab, then that new tab could redirect the origin tab, right? Oh. Even if it was from the same site. And that was a feature that was kind of possible since 1995 or 1996 and was kind of ignored for over 20 years, right? So maybe there are just attacks we don't even envision yet. So I would say vigilant and alert, but personally I don't expect any groundbreaking new attacks just due to the existence and widespread use of WebAssembly.
All right. Are there any languages in terms of development languages that we can use for web apps to provide better security mechanisms? Are there any that are better at helping you secure your apps?
I mean, so what many people are saying is that they prefer something which has stronger typing than JavaScript. I mean, JavaScript does have types, right? But it doesn't enforce type strictness. So TypeScript, for instance, is I think the most widely used one, which is really nice. But on the other hand, I've read a scientific publication a while back where they kind of were analyzing whether the code quality of dynamically typed languages is just by default worse than if you have strongly typed languages because you can't mess up that much in strong typed languages. And the result was and I'm kind of paraphrasing, right? So I don't have the exact result, but basically what they were saying is if there is an issue in a dynamically typed language, it's not the dynamic typing, right? So I say, it might help some, but I mean, I'm biased certainly because I do JavaScript since 25 years. So these oddities of the language, which are appealing to some, is something which I've accepted, right? So I wouldn't say I'm super fond of everything JavaScript is doing, but eventually I stopped caring and just do things. And therefore, these additional type safety features, for instance, they don't add that much value to me and to the quality of my code, but maybe others are more efficient due to those features being added. But which doesn't mean that I have never done any TypeScript projects. To the contrary, I've done a lot with TypeScript. But from a security point of view, I don't see much difference. I mean, the main security issues are either something that's happening on the server side because we have untrusted input, and there it doesn't really matter what language is run in the browser, or something that is exploiting somehow the JavaScript engine. And then again, it's how the content is created that is then sent to the client and rendered there. So I wouldn't expect any additional security features by a change of technology.
Okay. So like we discussed a little bit, the frameworks are evolving, making apps much more secure by the time goes on. Is it utopic to think that we could achieve a point where web security wouldn't be an issue anymore?
I've been dreaming about that and awaiting that moment since 2001. So I would really hope that this is the case. And I was looking at CVEdetails.com recently. So where they have these CVEs, they assign these CVE numbers when there's a security vulnerability in a software, and they had the statistics. And you see that there was like a peak for cross-site scripting, a peak at 2006, and then the number started going down. And I remember that I thought, okay, things are getting better, built-in cross-site scripting feed protection in browsers that kind of worked. But then, the last few years, the numbers just spiked and then they stopped doing the statistics. But there will always be novel attacks. But as I said, when you have specific stacks, some of these attacks just don't work as well anymore. So we talked about SQL injection, right? So if you are using an OR mapper, then likelihood for SQL injection is just very, very low. If you're using, since we mentioned Blazor, right? If you're using ASP.NET and the MVC framework there or Razor pages, everything is HTML escape by default. And of course, you can have vulnerabilities if you put something in the JavaScript context, so if you don't use the HTML escaping feature, but it's automated, so it's really, really hard. All of these comment traps, they go away. So I think that the attacks, they will become more complex.
Okay.
But as you rightfully say, SQL injection is going down. Cross-site scripting should go down because of escaping in frameworks and, of course, content security policy. With same-site cookies, cross-site request forgeries will significantly go down. Okay. So the situation is getting better. But I'm so, I'm so careful because I've said that before and I was wrong. So, but I have high hopes, right? So should get better, will get better. So I'm actually optimistic.
All right.
Yeah. Okay.
Maybe moving on the other side, instead of protecting our website, what do you think makes a good ethical hacker?
An ethical hacker, hacking is fun, I would say, because you get paid to destroy things, right? Isn't that cool? So I have a nursery and close to where I live, so I can kind of watch them, and they have great fun, building up stuff in the sand and then destroying it. So I think it's very motivating in there. But yeah, you have to be curious, and you have to have this criminal energy. But the energy should not be criminal enough that from an ethical hacker you turn into an unethical hacker. Yeah. So, but this being curious and having this evil mind, I think that combination is what makes many ethical hackers good at what they are doing.
On the other side, for bad actors, I heard that being what makes them good is leaving no traces at all. That's what makes a perfect attack, right?
That's a good attacker, but an ethical attacker doesn't care about traces, right?
No.
Or do you mean with traces like deleting the database? Okay, because if you leave traces like you change something in the application, then you're not a good ethical hacker. But I mean, when it comes to they can't find out that they were hacked, that's not something an ethical hacker is really interested in, because in the end they will contact the vendor anyway. If you're an unethical hacker, then certainly you try not to leave any traces. But yeah. But in the end, if you do hacking, or if you craft an attack, when I do an audit, I usually stop when I can prove that there's a security vulnerability, right? So I can say, okay, there is cross-site scripting, or this should be SQL injection, right? But not, hey, I dropped your database table. Do you believe me that you have SQL injection? That's not what I do, because why should I, right? I just need to prove that something might be wrong. Whether it's exploitable or a big issue, that's something that the customer needs to judge, not myself.
We talk about the SQL injections, and these we see some attacks going down, but what about new attacks? Are there new concerns these days about web securities? I mean, we solve vulnerabilities these days, but it's making a new place for new ones. So what are the new concerns?
There are some developments. Some of them refer to having kind of new twists for old attacks. So new cross-site scripting style vectors, for instance. Also, the thing with the opening up links and the target page can then access the origin page. But really, really groundbreaking new attacks that are exploiting the way the web works are rather rare, because it's basically the same since 25 years. So JavaScript is getting more and more powerful, but yeah, you can restrict what JavaScript is allowed to do, and I would say that kind of sets the limit to what is possible. But still, injecting JavaScript itself, that's cross-site scripting, right? So the attack is the same since I think in 1998 or 99 that the term cross-site scripting was coined by Microsoft engineers, right? It should be JavaScript injection, but cross-site scripting back then I think was the more common term or more popular term. And yeah, that's what led to the situation. But so really completely new big attack that will be in the top 3 of the OWASP top 10 eventually, rather not. New ways of cross-site scripting, always.
I still remember, I think the famous Worm in MySpace, it was cross-site. So,
yeah, that's cross-site request forgery. Exactly. That was cross-site request forgery. That was kind of groundbreaking, and cross-site request forgery was a problem for over a decade, right? But now we have same-site cookies, which kind of, take all of the fun out of cross-site request forgery, which is a good thing.
How do, are attacks mostly coming from outside organizations or from inside? Because we see lots of news when there's big attacks that it came from inside the organization because someone infiltrated or stuff like this. How's the ratio on this?
Of course, I only have anecdotal values from what I'm doing, but just let me say this, that inside knowledge is very, very useful for a successful attack, especially a high-profile attack. And some attacks really require inside knowledge. So I was briefly talking about XML external entities today in my talk, which is I would say, rather niche attack. And if that attack is possible, you can only really exploit it if you have certain inside knowledge. Otherwise, it's just a hypothetical attack. So inside knowledge does help. But in general, since there are only so many dozens, hundreds, or thousands of people inside a company and millions outside a company, and many of them try to attack it. I would still say that the majority of attacks still comes from the outside.
All right.
What do you think about password criteria? I mean, the passwords are used or are the main security measure for people to log into their makes it secure. So developers uses like a lots of different criteria, like put a lowercase, uppercase, number of characters, symbols, etc. But I read a comic on XKCD was some days. Yeah, the passwords are hard to remember for humans, but easy to find by robots. What are your thoughts on this?
Exactly. I think even the National Institute of Standards and Technologies, NIST, they changed their stance on that, because before they said, complex password, special characters, and I always thought, really? So everyone appends a 1 to their default password, right? No, the only thing, and the XKCD comic, and if you see my talk today, actually, I was referencing that comic in a short instance, cool. Actually, because
I haven't seen it.
A horse battery stapler or something like that, right? That's the comic you're referring to, so the only thing, and I agree with XKCD there absolutely, is the length. The length of the password. The longer, the better. I once got an error message, your password is too long. And, I don't care about the length of the password because I'm using a password safe. So I just have to know, my master password. I really don't care about the rest. So I make this as long as possible. But yeah, length it is. And actually that advice they gave there with just use a couple of nouns that are unrelated, but you kind of can connect them in your mind and just use them. That's fine. I mean, you could still use variations and whatever, use even more words or whatever, mistype some words, but still, length is key. Length is key, but using special characters, but then allowing 6-character passwords is not okay. And I'm also a bit nervous when a password has to be changed a lot, because that's when people start adding digits at the end.
How about storage? Another question on password. How about storage? How do you think the web is safe about storing password? Because, each sites are making their own way to store the password. Are they really safe? Is it? Each time I enter my password into a website, I always thought, okay, are they making it secure? I'm password on every site.
If you're using the same password all over the place, right, then this might indeed be a problem. Yeah, of course, I'm always anticipating that a company is not storing my password correctly.
Okay.
And so I'm never reusing passwords, never. I'm of course very interested in having a YubiKey or some kind of extra token, which gives me security. But yeah, I mean, I never take it granted that the data I send somewhere is completely safe, and therefore, yeah, I use a generated secure different password every single time, and if there is a leak, then of course I'm bothered that my name and my email address and maybe my birth dates are public knowledge, but my password is not, because I'm not using it anywhere else.
If the site uses the two-way factor authentication, I guess it's
I mean, that's also there's no 100% security, but still having an extra factor is nice. But yeah. Having just each password once is a good idea.
We spoke a bit earlier about tools for making assessments. Are there tools that will actually try hacking or doing something on your website, like penetration testing, that will brute force your application to try to find vulnerabilities?
Yeah, there are different vulnerability scanners that do this, or penetration testers. Some of them are commercial products. Actually, many of them are commercial products, but there are also free options. Even the OWASP has kind of an attack, their ZAP attack proxy, which basically, what they're basically doing in general is they're crawling your site to see, okay, where are the endpoints, forms, pages, and then they try to send typical whatever SQL injection payload, cross-site scripting payload. They look whether there is cross-site request forgery protection, and then they give you a list of what they think they found, right? And then you start from there. But again, you have to weed through the noise in order to get valuable information out there. So that's what's making an audit such a sizable effort, right? That's so it's that there's no automated. Okay, give me the root URL of your web application. Right. Push play, and then you get just the 3 vulnerabilities that were found. Then there, of course, are also static code analyzers that try to analyze your code.
I know some tools like Nmap that can help you find ports and have some more information of what it is exposed and on what size.
Yeah. So Nmap is more a port scan. So it's mapping your network. That's also helpful if you're not just checking the security of your application, but also the security of your network and if there are any open ports and services. So many of these things, with many of those things, tests can start with an automated process. But then reading through the results of that automated process, that's kind of the art form, so to speak, and then kind of drawing the right conclusions from what you're seeing there. I think that's the challenge. But just being aware of which risks exist and how they work, and then kind of learning to think like an attacker and looking for those things. I think that's just a very good starting point to make your own apps more secure.
On another topic, what do you think about social engineering, like phishing or scams? It's a big.
Do you want a good or bad answer?
Well, it's up to you. Do you think it's effective?
I hate it, of course, because it's a super effective tool, right? So some people are really, really trustworthy, right? I mean, if you work in security, you get paranoid. I hate paranoid, right? So I try to be as positive and open as possible. But of course, my training makes me always very suspicious of whatever I'm seeing. But yeah, no, social engineering is a super effective tool because it just can give you access to information that is hard to get otherwise. I mean, so many companies they are attacked by whatever people finding USB thumb drives in the parking lot and then just plugging them into their work machines because they're curious, right? Or whatever, getting phoned at. And I mean, with the pandemic in place, many people work from home. So actually, just today I read this story, but I couldn't verify it yet, from where some additional factor was physically sent to someone, but in their home office, and then some attackers just opened up their mailbox and just pull the information out, right? Because a company mailbox is probably better protected than John Doe's mailbox in my house, right? So yeah, but social engineering is a super effective tool, and it's hard to protect against it. Of course, you can create awareness. But on the other hand, we have so little personal interaction at the moment. So if someone is talking to me nicely,
you're willing to reply.
I'm super motivated to be very open. Exactly.
Do you think it's the biggest concerns of these days? Or?
It's a different concern. It's a different concern. I mean, web application security is a rather technical topic, because it's usually code that can be exploited and processes that can be exploited. Social engineering is a different kind of attack, but it's also super effective because it helps. Yeah, helps from an attacker point of view. Of course, it helps against secure coding. So even if a website is super secure, if someone gives you that password,
you can do much more about it. Do you have any advice for people to avoid being a victim of these attacks?
Better be paranoid than offline. That's all I can say. And I hate paranoia, but be paranoid. Be paranoid with your code and with whatever you're doing with sensitive information.
All right. That was, well, unless Francis, you have another question, but that was the last questions we had. Christian, thanks a lot. It was really
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure. Anytime.
Probably a topic people don't talk about a lot. So definitely an interest in seeing your point of view on this. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. Had a great fun, and thank you very much, and hope to see you
hopefully.
next time.
Thank you, Christian.
All right.
Thanks.
Thank you.